Conversations about schools involve the power of will, focus, and commitment. Those were the words of Ronald Edmonds, father of effective schools movement. Did you know that there are dual language public schools teaching in English and a second language? Did you know that there are magnet schools that specialize in one area and they have criteria for entrance? I wonder, do all students have access to these magnet schools? Welcome to our listeners in the North, South, East, and West. We are EDUCA K16 Podcast, bringing distinguished guests with a wealth of knowledge and expertise to cultivate curiosity, provide educational advice and best practices to move the education conversation forward. Stay in the now with EDUCA K16. Shout outs to Jose Carlos Bottles, post-production, DTO Music for our jingle, and to Arte Rezone for our logo. Please welcome my co-host, distinguished Dr. Abdin Novoa, who has written the only two books in the nation with a lens on Latinos and education in American history. Welcome, Dr. Novoa.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Dr. Novoa is recording from Puerto Rico. I am in the DMV area, and our special guest, Kika Fernandez, is in Florida. This is all possible because of Jose Carlos from Bottles. All right, Abdin and Kika Fernandez, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here also.
Thank you. Thank you. Listeners, let's focus on the comprehensive state of education. We know poverty rates are not subsiding, and the achievement highly correlates with income and race. 2/3 of all students are performing below the level of proficiency in reading and math. That's per the 2019 NAEP results, the NAPE results. For our listeners, Dr. Novoa, before we move further, can you please clarify the importance of NAPE?
NAPE stands for the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It is, frankly, the nation's report card, as it is called. It has been in operation for a number of decades, but since 1990, it has been documenting much more carefully educational progress through testing, through the standing of particular schools and their quality improvement, and through other measures. And so it has become the standard measure for the country in terms of educational progress, like the achievement gap. And what is unique about it since 1990 is that it has desegregated, or basically segregated and desegregated data in terms of looking at racial ethnic minorities in the context of schooling, as well as male-female gender differences in the context of schooling, among other factors like income. So it is the best standard by which we can compare different groups, whether by race, by gender, by income, and other factors.
Thank you so much for that clarification. To quote from your book, Dr. Novoa, from your book, Critical Issues of Latinos and Education in 21st Century, Where Are We? Sarita Brown from Excelencia in Education, under your challenge number 3, Gaps in Student Achievement, she says, there are profound disparities in our society, and so it stands to reason why there are achievement gaps in our schools. That's a very powerful statement. Dr. Novoa, before bringing on our distinguished Florida educator guest today, Marta Fernandez, known as Kika by her colleagues and friends, can you frame for us this disparity and achievement gap in 3 minutes or less?
I wish I could in 3 minutes or less, but let me give it a try and use the phrase that Sonia Nieto has used. She wasn't the only one, nor was she the first, but she calls it an opportunity gap. And so access, in terms of opportunity, among other variables, makes the difference in terms of what's going on with so-called achievement gap. We know by far that it's not that some students are better than others, because they're all pretty much of the same equivalence, regardless of their background, but it's opportunity that then creates those gaps over time.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was great. That was 3 minutes or under. Listeners, if you're just tuning in, I have the pleasure to introduce to you an educator and dear friend of mine. We've known each other for many, many years. Marta Fernandez. She is an educator who has been involved in bilingual education and magnet schools in Florida. Welcome, Kika.
Thank you.
Can you please tell us a little bit about you and your work in the field of bilingual education and magnet schools?
Sure. I've been an educator for 32 years. I've worked mostly in Miami. My first 26 years were spent in Coral Way Bilingual School, which was the first bilingual school created in the United States. And it was created as a neighborhood school in order to meet the needs of the influx of Cuban immigrants that were coming to Miami. So at that time, they decided to make the education platform there a bilingual 50-50 school. In other words, the students would go to school 50% of the day in English and 50% of the day in Spanish. And they were able to hire Cuban immigrants to come in as paraprofessionals, educators, in order to teach the Spanish part. And the whole philosophy behind this type of bilingual school was, if you are a bilingual learner from kindergarten on, then you should be able to learn different subjects in both languages. So instead of teaching English, science, and math in Spanish, and then the rest of it in English, what they did was they said, okay, I don't have to repeat myself. I can just teach the math in Spanish and not have to do it in English because they're bilingual learners, and therefore you don't need both languages. So that was where I spent a lot of my time, and we had a great mentor as a principal there who truly believed in the program and was very successful in teaching us young teachers how to implement this bilingual program. My daughters attended bilingual programs in a different mode. They were more magnet than they were neighborhood schools. So they had a specific criteria that they had to have before they could enter. So that's where I've, spent my life in education. I also now teach at a very prestigious magnet school in Miami. So I actually don't teach. I am the test chair, which, by the way, I implemented the NAPE in my school. So we were chosen, and our 8th graders were tested to see where they fell amongst. So it's kind of interesting to hear Dr. Abdin speak about that. So, yeah.
Well, Kika, in terms of what you have just said, and thank you for that, I know Coral Way was one of the major bilingual schools from the very beginning, soon after 1968, when the Bilingual Education Act was passed.
Well, they were because of them.
Well, right, that's true. So it became very well known, and it was probably the most quoted bilingual school for the next 10 years in the country, because it was the prototype. So you are very distinguished to have been there. Now, you use the terms bilingual education, you use the term magnet schools, and I want our audience to understand that public schools are not all the same. They have different purposes, they have different goals, and they're structured differently, one from the other. And so there's a lot of variance. And so a public school is not a public school, is not a public school. And we need to understand those differences. So the key question is, since we have something called charter schools, which, by the way, for our audience, those are public schools. It's just a different category. We also have magnet schools. We have bilingual schools, or what we call dual language schools. We also have community schools, and we have other specialized schools. And so it becomes very confusing to understand one from the other. But let's just focus for today on magnet schools. What do we mean, Kika, by magnet schools? How do we understand the context of a magnet school and the difference between that and any other type of school?
Okay, so a magnet school is a school that has specific criteria for students to be eligible to participate. So there's certain subjects or certain classes that a student needs to have. There needs to be a certain GPA also that goes along with that. And what ends up happening is there's an application period where students are asked to apply to the magnet schools. And then they are sifted through and they see if you meet the criteria, then you're put into a lottery system. Okay. And then once you're in the lottery system, there's a random drawing and those students will start being selected for the school. So in order to even be considered for the lottery, you have to have a specific criteria. And that's where things get a little iffy because the criteria is not always accessible to all the other schools that are public schools. So it has to be extremely specific. And these schools have a common goal in their curriculum. So for example, there's language schools, there's schools that focus on law, there's schools that focus on the police, there's schools that focus on the arts. It just depends what the child's interests are. So Miami is very fortunate that we have several different types of magnet schools available to our students.
So what you're saying is that there are, well, I want the audience to understand that even the term magnet schools can convey different kinds of schools within the context of magnet schools. That is, specialized in different areas. So even magnet schools are different sometimes, one from the other. Okay. Back to you, Sandra.
Yeah. So just a little bit probing a little bit more about magnet schools. So give us the context of why magnet schools exist. Like we heard about the bilingual programs existed because people wanted to keep their cultural heritage and language. But what is the idea behind magnet schools for our audience to know?
Well, when they first began in the 1970s, what they were trying to do was to really give opportunity for all students. You know, there was a certain criteria that it had to be 1/3 Hispanic, 1/3 African American, 1/3 white, so that there would be a diversity in the classroom, and therefore everyone could really integrate their culture into the program. So that was very important at the beginning of these magnet schools. That was a big push.
So it was a segregation of sorts.
Yeah, it was kind of giving opportunity for all, you know, and that type of thing. And at the beginning, it really was that, you know, it was really, really well done at the beginning, I believe. You know.
So you talk about the beginning as there's something different happening now. So let's focus on that. Can you focus on what's happened? What are the differences? It's not accessible.
Access. It's really access to these schools in the sense of how do you get the students there? You know, because once the student is accepted, great. But if the student lives 20 miles away from the school, that student needs transportation. You know, and how does that work? The transportation work. That's a big thing, you know, because, for example, the school that I am, I have students that come from Homestead that are taking a bus, then the metro. So basically they're waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get to school. You know, that's difficult to do every day, you know. So, you know, should we start bringing magnet schools more closer to these areas to get these students the ability to get there without having to stress all of these things, which are, the transportation and that type of thing. And the other part is also the access of the classes and the requirements that are needed in order to apply to these magnet schools. Are these middle schools providing the courses necessary for students who want to do these magnet programs to be able to fall into the lottery? So that's a big thing too.
So my original question that I had in mind to ask you, so yeah, maybe you're going to ask it, Abdin. Go ahead.
Well, I heard the term access, and I heard the term difficulty in terms of transportation. One of the big concerns of magnet schools is that there are not enough of them, or that they are sort of re-privatizing the whole process of public schooling, so that those who have the means, or those who are ahead, get further ahead, and those who do not have a chance to catch up. And so it's a kind of creaming of sorts. And so, and it's been attacked because of that. How would you respond to that kind of a concern in our community, in that a lot of parents want their child to go to a magnet school, but there are only so many spaces, there are only so many possibilities, and oftentimes they're very upset that their child does not enter?
Well, we've here in the school that I'm at, there's several campuses now. So that helps tremendously. In other words, the philosophy of our magnet school is now also there's one in Homestead, there's one in North Miami. So they're basically kind of, like you said, kind of privatizing it, because it's kind of branding it, in a way. So that is an option. Also, there are schools that now have cohorts within the school that are magnet. So if you're in a large high school, there's going to be a cohort of magnet that those kids can participate within their own school. So really broadening the magnet spectrum and saying, this is a very successful magnet, this works. Let's see if we can implement it in this high school, and in this high school, and in this high school, and give those children that opportunity without really having to do the travel, because the travel is a very difficult part of getting these kids to these schools. So that's really important to be able to say, let's open them up.
And let me continue along the same line. One of the things that I would favor and advocate for is for precisely what you were saying, and that is to have more magnet schools. And then I could push the button all the way and say, why aren't all of our schools magnet schools? How can we continue in that direction so that we have highest quality education for everybody? And let's magnetize the whole process. I don't know how magnet schools have grown over the last 10 years, if there are more of them, or if access is easier now than it was in the past. But how would you respond to those sets of conditions?
Well, I think that regular high schools, just to use the word regular, not in any way, but regular high schools are more community-based, in the sense of they're a neighborhood school, the kids maybe do after school there, that type of thing. There's not a single focus, whereas in a magnet school, you have more of a single focus as a collective faculty. And these other schools, which are not magnet, they're broader in their service. They service everyone. And I know that we have high schools here that have day programs, night programs, and stuff like that, which makes it very different than what the magnet school is. The magnet school is very focused. They're themed. They have one purpose, and they're very successful in their graduation rates, which is...
So let's talk about that. How do we know that magnet schools are effective with our youth? Like, what is the evidence? For example, in your school?
Graduation rate. We have 100% graduation rate. And that is because it's very specific, and it's a smaller school. You're able to, have counselors, and you're able to have lead teachers, and you're able to have people come into your classroom and do example lessons, so those type of things really, really create, a motivation for everyone to be on the same page and move forward.
Innovation, right? Innovation. So tell us about your school. Like what's the name of your school?
Well, I work for Mast Academy in Key Biscayne, and it's a very specific school. It has a maritime program, it has a Cambridge program, and it's very specific. And the kids, are driven, and the faculty is driven, and we, graduation rate is successful. So we can go from there. We'll see.
But beyond graduation rate, are there other?
It's a collective feeling, in the sense of the faculty is working towards the same thing. The students are all working towards the same thing. The administration are all working towards the same thing. And that really creates, this sense of, worth while you're working. It's important. You feel important.
Belonging.
You feel important. You feel that you're helping someone. You feel that you're guiding someone. You're teaching them. So it is nice.
So if you're just tuning in, EDUCA K16 started the conversation today on Latinos in education with distinguished expert on magnet schools, Kika Fernandez, and my co-host, Dr. Novoa, who has written the two books, only the two books in the United States about Latinos in education, the story of Latinos in education in American history, and critical issues of Latinos in the 21st century America. Where are we? You can hear and see our interviews from the prominent educators Dr. Novoa interviewed for his research on America's educational challenges as we distill the books through these interviews. Today, we have been talking about magnet schools. Do you know what they are? How efficient are they? Why aren't all public schools magnet? So, Kika, some last words for our audience. How do parents get involved? How do they find out about magnet schools, like in their area, or could they advocate for them? Or what do you recommend parents to do that are listening in?
I think that there is definitely a need. I think that's why these magnet schools were created, because there was a need for different types of school, for different types of population. We're a very diverse population in Miami. We have people from all over the world, and it was just a need, and we were able to meet the need at that time. I think Dr. Abdin said something before that I think is true. Like in the last 10 years, there hasn't been growth in magnet schools or anything like that. We've kind of been stagnant, So I do believe that, my kids went to a bilingual school, and it was the best decision I ever made. I will say that.
So was your bilingual school a magnet school or a neighborhood school?
They went to a magnet school. They did the German program, and they're fluent in German. And they started when they were in first grade. They went all the way through 8th grade, and it was a true, magnet school. That's all it was. And they studied their languages. They studied, and it was very successful. They were very successful in high school because of that school, and the way that it taught. They were. And now they speak 3 languages, which is incredible.
It is incredible.
It's not something that we see every day. It's not Latin America. I remember when I lived in Venezuela, we would go to school in English and Spanish. There was just no question. That's just the way it was.
And in Europe and in Africa, and yeah. So what I hear you say, making a connection, and Dr. Novoa, perhaps you heard this too, and you can speak to magnets a lot more than I can, but I hear that there should be a connection even starting from the elementary school, guiding students to understand what this is, and families, right? Like trying to make connections between elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. Is that what I hear you say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If we get them young and we move them up, and then we're innovative, these kids will be successful regardless. They have that opportunity that we can give them. So yeah, I do believe that these schools help. Learning in 2 languages is unique. you know, and being able to express yourself in both languages equally is truly a gift. So
And it's great for
absolutely,
our critical thinking skills. That's so clear. It's
absolutely,
been proven by research.
absolutely.
Dr. Novoa, some last words to bring it together, magnet schools, student achievement.
Well, it's important for us to understand the role of magnet schools. And a lot of us as educators would like to maximize that opportunity by creating more magnet schools. The other is that it would be nice if magnet schools, in fact, were to start at lower grades so that eventually it would not have to sort out at higher grades, but bring in rather than sort out at lower grades. And so the whole area of magnet schools should not be as controversial as it is today. And we need to understand that magnet schools cost more money, so that we are putting more money into schools that are more effective and less money in schools that are ineffective. And so that critical balance or unbalance that exists in education is one that we need to more carefully examine as to why it is, how it is, and what we can do about it, because what we all want is what magnet schools are doing, and that is maximizing the educational process in this country. So wishful thinking is that all our schools become magnet schools, and so that's what we should shoot for, and that's what we should rally around.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you to our special guest and longtime friend and educator, Kika Fernandez, and to our distinguished author and co-host, Dr. Novoa. Most importantly, a big thank you to all of our listeners. We are EDUCA K16 Podcast and YouTube channel. Listeners, stay tuned next week as we continue to elevate the conversation about education in America. Visit domasgroup.com to learn more, and go to Amazon to purchase Dr. Novoa's books, The Story of Latinos in Education in American History and Critical Issues of Latinos in Education in 21st Century America. There's nothing like reading a good book.